Hello and welcome. I am live from Pellam's Wasteland, and today I have another episode of Pellam's Wasteland Reads for you all. This time covering the main Witcher novels. These are the five books in the main series. They were all released in Polish in a pretty similar time. I don't remember how far apart they are, but only like a year or two at the most between publications is what I remember off the top of my head. And then were translated into English, of course, so that people like me who do not read Polish can read them um, after the success of the video games. I mentioned in the last one, the last Witcher discussion, that the translations started, I'm pretty sure, after The Witcher 2 released. And you can see, I guess if you're watching the video, a lot of the art is Witcher 2 era art, which is kind of an interesting quirk. It's only the very last book in the main novels, The Lady of the Lake, has what is clearly Witcher 3 art as the cover art, and the rest of these are all Witcher 2 era art, which is just a fun little detail about this particular series. Anyway, the Witcher books, if you missed my last episode, follow Geralt of Rivia, who is a witcher, which is a monster hunter in a fantasy world, a professional who deals with all of these things that many other characters cannot deal with. Although one of the kind of contentious elements of this series is that Geralt ends up doing a lot less witchering as the novels go on. There's a couple of moments where he ends up doing more. So like in the fifth book, there's one kind of section where Geralt has sort of returned to witchering for a while, doing his monster hunting thing. But a lot of this series ends up becoming sort of about these characters, but not necessarily in the same context or roles. So many of the characters that were introduced in the short stories are present here. Geralt obviously is sort of the biggest one, although in many ways the series is as much or more about Ciri, who is Geralt's adopted daughter, essentially, who appears a little bit in the short stories. She's in two of the short stories in Sword of Destiny, and her strange fairy tale parentage is one of the famous stories in the first collection, The Last Wish. But by the time of Blood of Elves, we are in the aftermath of that last story in Sword of Destiny, something more. Geralt has rescued Ciri from the places where she was hiding out as essentially a war refugee. Her kingdom, her grandmother was Queen Calanthe of Sintra, and Sintra has been conquered by the Empire of Nilfgaard. Excuse me, my voice is not 100% this morning apparently. But the Cintran issue is one of the elements running through this story. The Empire of Nilfgaard, who is this territorially acquisitive imperial force that is at the edge of this area called the Northern Kingdoms, which is where most of our characters are from. The northern kingdoms are politically disunified. There's Temeria, led by King Foltest. There's Redania, who's in a bit of political turmoil for much of the series, although one of the famous characters from the games is a young man in the time of the books. Radovid of Redania. But then there is also, let's see, why can't I think of? There's Queen Maeve of Lyria and Rivia, and then there is also Eddern and Kedwin, and then there's a couple of other small. So there's like the Mahakam mountains and valley, Mahakam Hills. I don't remember for certain. And then there's also places kind of smaller enclaves and smaller kingdoms. And there's no official map of all of this. All of the maps that have been produced for supplementary material, the video games and the TV show, all of that, all of that is, I think, technically regarded as semi-canon, as canonical to those stories, but not necessarily to the books. There aren't any maps of things in the books, not like a lot of other fantasy stories where you open up front cover and see the map of the fantasy world, and there's a big list of principal characters and a glossary and all these different things. And that's one of the things that I really liked about this series. I really liked The Witcher a lot. I ended up feeling really attached to a lot of the characters. There's a lot of fun moments. It's really a you know really fun and interesting fantasy series. A lot of kind of interesting, sort of slightly different fantasy flavor stuff, which of course comes through in the short stories as well. But in particular, one of the things that I happened to really like, although I think it has a not 100% positive, that's kind of an understatement, a mixed feeling among a lot of the fans, is the stylistic changes of these novels relative, especially to the short stories. Geralt is a lot less present in a lot of these novels. In some of them, he's really central to most of the story. But then, like, even in the very first one, in Blood of Elves, the last kind of third of the book or so is really Ciri and Yennefer doing stuff without Geralt around. And Geralt has been important up until this point in the book and has kind of set events in motion, but he's not necessarily at the center of the events being described in the book. Or, for instance, there's a moment, I think, in Time of Contempt. There is a great sequence that is, Geralt has been very badly wounded, and is recovering in this magical forest, the forest of Broccolon, and is talking to his troubadour friend Dandelion, and Dandelion is sort of trying to tell him what's going on, and it becomes this kind of continually flashing away from Geralt and Dandelion in the forest talking to the active events of the war with Nilfgaard that is going on, the Nilfgaardian invasion of the kingdom of Edirn, and the fighting there and the political turmoil and all these different things. And that really becomes a lot of what the like style of the books turns into, is that there's this great kind of sweeping kind of multi-viewpoint presentation of events, that there are lots of kind of minor characters. There are lots of these moments that are very, very quickly shown that are sort of related to something in the kind of main plot line that we've been following. But some of it is spatially differentiated like that, where it's all kind of events happening at the same time, but we're seeing different perspectives in the world. But then we also have temporal jumping as well, especially kind of as the series goes on. We get more and more, like in one of the kind of big climactic moments, and I guess we're getting sort of into spoilers here. So if you're not interested in spoilers, you don't have to watch the rest of the video. Just know that I like these books a lot, and I would recommend this as a fantasy series if somehow you're someone who has reached my channel and does not know about the Witcher books. These ones are pretty fun. But to get into spoilers, in the last book, The Lady of the Lake and the Battle of Brenna, there's this great kind of multi-sectioned attempt at wrestling with the battle. And so we have character perspectives from in the midst of the battle, but then we also have, like, one of the characters in the midst of the battle, we have his perspective many years later trying to write up the history of the war and what happened. And then we also have other perspectives from many years later. The military colleges discussing military history and the aftermath of this battle and what happened, and then all these other kind of different attempts at understanding what's going on. And I think that's part of why the series really grabbed me, is that this real kind of kaleidoscopic view of so many of the events is really interesting. To me, at least, it's stylistically interesting, but it's also really thematically, so much of what these stories become about is not just the events themselves, but the kind of storytelling quality of them, the way that they become part of history and myth and all this sort of stuff, in a way that really, I think, despite there being some major stylistic differences from the short stories, feels very in keeping with the thematic core of the short stories. That so many of these short stories are kind of a fairy tale concept taken and twisted and presented in a different direction, sort of a real, like, the story behind the legend. And then so much of the novels is very much a similar, the story behind the legend, in the sense that this legend has kind of grown over the years and become part of history and myth, and in the future, long after kind of the events of Geralt and Ciri and Yennefer that we know of from the kind of main plot of the story, these have become part of the, like, popular consciousness, and that there are these tales told about them and songs told about them and theories about what happened and all this stuff, and this really wonderful quality of sort of the story kind of growing and changing in the telling, and trying to wrestle in some sense with what, like, all of this means in a story that is also just, like, compelling in itself. And there are real moments that I think I really loved a lot. I talked about Time of Contempt, the sequence Geralt in the Forest of Broccolon healing is so kind of moody and atmospheric in a way that is really wonderful. The stuff in, I think about, like, in, especially at the end of Tower of Swallows, there's a great sequence where Geralt and his friends end up in Beauclair, and it's really cool to have a pretty grim and gritty fantasy series that has gotten into some pretty nasty territory. There's a lot of nasty, like, non-sexual and sexual violence that has happened by this point in the series, and some pretty crazy stuff that has gone on. And then they end up in this kingdom that has this, like, rich tradition of knighthood, and all of the knights sound ridiculous and awesome, and they're all like, "Hark, who goes there?" and things like that. Or at one point they say, "And who are you trying to enter our lands? You must identify yourself to pass into Beauclair." And Geralt says, "Oh, well, I've taken a vow to hide my identity until I can complete a quest for my true love." And all the knights are like, "Oh, well, that makes perfect sense. Obviously, we're not going to force you to reveal your identity if you've taken a vow, an oath to your true love to complete a quest." It's so wonderful in the midst of this pretty dark story about all of these horrible things happening to people. It's really great to have this moment that is so fun and willing to embrace the kind of ridiculousness. And then there's also, I mean, there's a sequence in Lady of the Lake that I keep thinking about, right near the end, and Geralt has reunited with Ciri. They're apart spatially for most of the series by, like, total length. I would say the majority of the series, because it's not until basically, pretty close to the end of the Lady of the Lake that they reunite, and they both get Ciri gets a collection of Witcher medallions and gives one new a new medallion to Geralt and takes one for herself and puts them on. And Geralt says, "It's just a symbol, Ciri." And Ciri says, "Everything is just a symbol." And it's so good because it's so beautifully encapsulates, like, this is her having, like, grown up and reckoning with adulthood and this, the magical power that she has, and the kind of wrestling with the unreality of all of these things in a way that is like such a beautiful moment between the two of them that happens in the space of like two lines. It's so good. And it's I think part of why, again, like, I really liked so many elements of this. The characters are really interesting, the style is so good, and then there are also these really really touching moments in the midst of, like I said, a pretty dark story. It's a lot of nasty stuff that happens in the series, but it's good. It's really fun. I liked the Witcher series a lot. I think it's a really interesting, like, kind of different flavor, as I mentioned, than a lot of the fantasy stuff that not necessarily that I read quite as much of now, but especially I think about, like, in high school, I was really into, like, the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and I've talked about R. Scott Baker's Second Apocalypse series on here before, and all of these kind of huge fantasy series that are these, obviously those are two pretty big ones. Malazan in particular, right, is obviously really huge, and so it's a really interesting kind of different flavor of fantasy that is able to bring in a lot of elements that are really cool and put together just a really compelling story, and also do some kind of like cool stylistic stuff with that. So I liked it a lot. If you are feeling excited about reading these books, I hope you will let me know in the comments and all that sort of stuff. They're really fun, and I can definitely recommend this series of novels, although you got to start with the short story. So it's basically a 7 book recommendation if anybody is up for that. But otherwise, leave a comment down below if you have anything you want to say. Otherwise, I've been live in Pellam's Wasteland, and I will see you next time. Take care, everybody.